Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Faith Washington Show. We are live on Facebook, Periscope, 95.3 FM, 1470 AM, and the iHeartRadio app, WWNN. And I have a very special guest tonight. I always do, but this is going to be a great show, you guys. Thanks for tuning in. My guest is attorney Mark Astor. Mark, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Faith. It's so good to be here with you.
I'm so thankful that you came on the show. I think I've been asking you for a while.
I think I was asking you for a while. That's what it was.
Yeah. Well, it's just I'm so thankful because the work that you do is really amazing. He is the founder and owner of drugandalcoholattorneys.com, and he helps families with kids that are actually addicted or have mental illness, and this affects all of us. Every single person sitting out there hearing my voice or watching this show knows someone around them that has some type of an addiction problem or mental illness. We just went through the Parkland shooting, which really and truly we know that there are a lot of components to that. And Mark, you know what? I'm just going to kind of let you roll with this,
right?
Because I want you to introduce yourself and give us a little bit about your background, and then the heart of why you do what you do.
All right. So, I'm an attorney. Have been since 1994. I did law school at Nova. Mm-hmm. But as I told you, I don't tell people I'm an attorney.
I love the story. You got to listen to this very carefully because it's really good.
You make me blush a little bit here. For a couple of reasons. My father, when he was alive, used to joke with me that he hated all the lawyers except for me. So I became a little bit paranoid about telling people I was a lawyer. And the second reason, probably the more important reason that I don't tell people I'm a lawyer, is because it's really a very small part of what I do. I help families and individuals who are in crisis because of addiction and mental illness. And I am typically the last port of call for a family who are basically out of options when it comes to helping their loved ones who are dealing with addiction and or mental illness. So, I'm the guy they come to when they don't know what else to do.
Absolutely. And I think that if they don't have somewhere to go, most people don't even know all the things that we spoke about before the show to set this up. And that's really, to me, what's important is that they get the information so they have the tools so they can come to you and know that there is help, and that there is hope. So, something, explain to us the difference between their two things, the Baker Act and the Marchman Act.
Okay.
Just briefly give us a little bit of an offshoot of what those are.
Okay, so I think a lot of people have heard of the Baker Act. The Baker Act is basically an involuntary commitment. In other words, taking somebody against their will where they're held at a receiving facility, a mental health type facility, typically for 72 hours. That can be extended, but typically it's 72 hours, and it's typically initiated by either the police who are called to the scene of some type of incident, or it might be instituted by, say, a therapist of some kind who...
Well, could a parent call?
They could, parent might...
if something is happening, like the kid is 17 years old and they're out of control, they're destroying the house, could they call?
Absolutely, they could call and say, my kid is completely out of control, and I'm afraid they're going to hurt somebody.
Okay.
The police will come, and if they make a determination that there's a potential of the harm to either the child or the parent or somebody else in the household, they're going to take them.
Wow, okay.
So that's the Baker Act. But the Marchman Act is Florida's involuntary commitment statute for somebody who is suffering from addiction, and if there's mental illness and mental illness. And the big difference, there's two big differences. One is if you use the courts to initiate the Marchman Act, and I won't get into the other ways you can use it, but for our purposes, if you're using me to help you initiate the Marchman Act, one, it can be done in secrecy without the child knowing about it. That's number one. And number two, it allows you to ask a judge for a court order to send your child for treatment for up to 90 days at any one period of time.
See, that's incredible, because this is how I know that people don't know about it, because they're not using it. It's through the court system, and it's court appointed for the up to 90 days. And they may need 90 days.
Well, the children that I Marchman Act, they tell me, 90 days is a minimum. And, when we say children, typically I'm dealing with somebody between 18 and, say, 30. Although you can use it for somebody under 18, but typically that's when the the proverbial poop really hits the fan. Is sort of over
when
18.
they're older, right?
Yeah, because they've already gone through that progression. That addiction has significantly increased, and now it's an out of control situation. So obviously, we're looking to give them, as you said, help and hope, but also to give them some control over what is an out of control situation.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes it makes parents feel, you feel kind of hopeless. You feel like throwing your hands up and going, what do I do? What can I do? What's the next logical step? I mean, do I just give up on my kid? No, you don't give up, but sometimes you really have to outsource and figure out a different way. But there's something really interesting that I found as we spoke, and there are a couple of arenas that you use for really helping, and one is the criminal court system and the Marchman Act.
Correct.
And then you're also coming into another third arena that you're going to be using in your practice, which is known as the guardianship
We do guardianship
statute.
work, which has traditionally been used for folks when their loved ones get a little older and they're dealing with issues of competency. In other words,
Got it, like dementia, Alzheimer's,
right,
things like that.
They
right.
can't make a decision for
Right.
themselves. And so from a legal perspective, there's no real difference between, say, an elderly person who has dementia who can't make a rational decision and a child who's, say, 22 years old and is having issues with addiction or mental illness and can't make a rational decision.
Yeah, it sounds like the same thing.
From a legal perspective, it's absolutely the same thing. It's just a matter of an expert telling a judge, they can't make the decision that's in their best interest.
Right. And they may harm themselves or someone else.
Right.
And then you were also going to go into estate planning to keep the kids financially and legally, sound when they can't make those correct decisions for themselves, like wasting an inheritance or
Right.
or legally, getting into serious trouble and ending up in prison, to avoid those things.
Right.
So I think that's a very cool deal, and I know that you're partnering with people in town to make these things come to fruition.
Correct, especially when it comes to what we call the opioid litigation. So
Yes. Let's hear a little bit about that. Opioids, folks, for those of you that don't know, OxyContin, Percocet, anything with oxycodone in it, fentanyl, anything along the lines of prescription drug medications. They're also known as Schedule II narcotics, and they're highly addictive. And right now, the United States is facing what's known as the opioid crisis. There are so many people that die of overdoses every day. It's a pretty frightening statistic. I know that you had mentioned something about there are 22 vets per day that commit suicide. So there you go.
And we get those calls on the veterans, and we love the veterans. I mean,
Yes,
who doesn't,
absolutely.
right? So,
yes, love the vets.
Every once in a while, we get a call from a veteran, but I've just recently gotten a little bit more involved in that that community, and apparently we're losing 22 veterans a day to suicide, which to me
Shouldn't be any. Shouldn't be any.
It's ridiculous. You send up an 18, 19-year-old off to some far off place, you come back and they're suicidal. I mean, there's something wrong with that.
There's something very wrong with that. It's very messed up. Folks, I just want to give you the website and the phone number again, drugandalcoholattorneys.com, and that's 561-419-6095, 561-419-6095. And you know what? I wanted to mention a couple of the attorneys that work with you, Audra Simovich and Louis Hanna.
Right. So
kudos to you guys. Thank you so much for being on board.
Audra's my guardianship lawyer, and Louis and I were both prosecutors together, and helps me a lot with some of the bigger criminal cases we get, because unfortunately addicts tend to lie, cheat, and steal. Not because they're bad. That's just the nature of the disease. So
yes,
mums and dads tell me, well, mum's jewelry went missing, cash went missing. So
you know who did it.
Yeah.
And they deny it.
Well, listen, when the child goes in and pawns the flat screen TV and the thumbprints on the receipt for the TV that the pawnbroker now has,
oops,
kind of hard to deny.
Yeah, and something that you have a saying that I know you've said before, that they're going to end up in one of three places.
Right.
And this is kind of important and critical to hear, so please give us that.
Well, so, I'm not being one to sugarcoat, these diseases.
You're blunt.
I am blunt.
I'm blunt too. I love blunt because it works.
So, there's a couple of things that we know for sure about addiction and mental illness. Number one, it only gets worse with time. It never gets better. So that means there's only one or three places your child's going. They're going to go to treatment, they're going to go to prison, or they're going to the morgue. They'll be dead. And so, the conversation really with a mom and dad, especially when we're having that heart to heart, about what's really been going on here with their child is, how do we get your kid into treatment, right? That's the,
Right.
I tell them, you have three options: treatment, treatment, or treatment. Which one do you want? Because if you don't, it's going to
It'll be
get worse.
prison or death.
And I sometimes get them where they have now progressed and they are in the criminal justice system. And I've had those calls, as I told you before we came on air, where, the night before they came to see me, the child, basically died and was, paddled back to life. I've also had those calls on a Monday night at 9 o'clock, and by 3 o'clock the next morning, the child was dead. So, I have those calls too. So, this is what we deal with. So it's a very...
It's very intense.
It's intense and it's emotional because we're dealing with someone's most precious asset, their child.
Right.
Right?
Agreed.
Not that other matters in a person's world aren't important. If they're losing their house, it's terrible, but we're talking about their child and we're trying to save them.
It's life.
And we're at the point where if we don't do something now, there's a very strong likelihood that there's going to be no point of return.
Yeah. That's to me, that's why this is like so critical. And we sort of set this up so that you could give us some steps or action points that parents can take away. The first thing that you guys do is called triage the case. You discover that point of origin. Okay, what's the real cause? And I want you to kind of delineate
Right.
about that.
So, it's a bit of a medical term, but probably because I have two doctors in the family.
It's all good.
Yeah, it's all good. We like doctors.
We'll just keep it kind of, medium level.
So we call it triage in the case. And what I mean by that is, it's really important to find out, spend a little time with the family to find out what's been going on. When did this start? Why did it start? If there's addiction issues, what's the drug of choice? What caused it? What precipitated it? If there's mental illness, when was that diagnosed? What was the diagnosis?
Was it
right? Was it? If it was treated with medication, tell me about that. And the reason it's important to find that out is because, for two reasons. One, depending on what really is the underlying cause here, might determine what legal course of action we're going to take. Because obviously, what we're doing is we're going to use the court system to make the treatment decision for that person's child that the child can't make for themselves, right? So we're going to step into that child's shoes, as it were, and we're going to make the decision they can't make. That's number one. So the legal course of action. Number two is what's the treatment course of action, right? Because obviously, if addiction is primary, that's one thing, and mental illness is second, right? In other words, they're addicted, and that's may have been a contributing factor to the mental illness, as opposed to somebody who has mental illness primary and they're self-medicating with whatever they're self-medicating with. So that's going to affect where we send them. So we need to find that out. And as we talked about, what may present as an addiction issue may be something where there's been trauma, physical abuse, sexual abuse. So the person is now self-medicating, and to the parents, the child's an addict. But when I look at it, I'm like, your child's an addict, but they're an addict because they were sexually assaulted many years ago, or they were bullied, or whatever the underlying causes. But you got to find it out, because I don't want to send a child who's been sexually assaulted 15 years ago to a drug treatment center. They get clean, because the minute they step out of that treatment center, they're going right back to what they did before, and probably worse. So we want to get them clean and keep them clean. That's really, that's the goal.
And where this comes in is in that triage where you guys sit down with the families, and this is the part that I find like an amazing, caring heart, is that you sit down and take the time to figure out which it is. You question the kid, you question the parents.
Yeah.
You're digging to find, okay, which is it? Mental illness first, then addiction. Addiction, mental illness after that. And I find that fascinating.
Well, I think you have to look. Parents are coming to us. They have a very, very difficult situation, right? And
huge. Mm-hmm.
And
agreed.
I think what people don't know, if you're on the outside of this, what you don't realize is that, there's a reason we call it the disease of addiction or the disease of mental illness. It's because it's not an individual disease. It's a family disease, right? I know when my father was sick for a couple of years and he was dealing with heart issues and everything else, I know how it affected us as a family. And I will tell you, the first time I sat with a family whose child, this particular child, was actually in the criminal justice system, who had mental illness and, was using drugs to self-medicate, I looked at that family and I could see what it was doing. It was destroying the family. Mom and dad were fighting. The kid couldn't concentrate. everything was going sideways, and it will destroy the family. So you have to understand that when you sit down with the family, because you're looking to save not just the child but the family too. Right. And so you got to look. As lawyers, we're so egotistical. We're so lawyers, and I hate to poo-poo the legal industry, but lawyers love to sit down and tell everybody how smart they are. Client comes to me, they don't care where I went to law school.
No, they
don't care if I got straight C's or straight A's. They're coming to me because their kid is dying.
Right.
And they want me to save their child. So I don't want to waste time telling them where I went to law school, how many cases I won, or how smart I am.
They're gonna figure that out anyway.
They are. Well, you know what they're going to figure out? They're going to figure out if I care or not.
That you care.
If I care. That's what they want. They want to know that
I
I care. So we got to move quickly because their child, this is an emergency situation, right? We don't have a lot of time. I want to know. I've got an hour or 2 hours. Let's sit. Let's figure out what's going on and ask the right questions. Tell me what's going on here so I can tell you if I can help you. And if I can't help you, I'll tell you I can't help you.
Right.
If I can, I'm going to say, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, these are your options. Let's do this, right? Let's do this. Let's save your kid. And so sometimes mom and dad will say, we need to think about it. And sometimes mom and dad realize, especially if their kid's overdosed and walked out of multiple treatment centers, it's now or never.
Wow. It's either do or die.
Let's go.
Yep.
And so, look, you got to ask the questions. You got to dig. You ask those uncomfortable questions, you know? So.
Do you find that most of the time the parents and the kids are pretty forthcoming?
Well, so I don't rarely get to speak to the kid. I do get to speak to the kid, but not initially. Normally, it's after
you've spoken to the parents, right? You get a little more information.
Well, after I've had him picked up and I've had him stabilized for a week, then I normally get to see the kid, and I normally see him in court.
Okay.
So I do get to have that conversation, and I like to have that conversation because I don't want them to see me as the enemy or as an adversary. I want them to understand.
The advocate. You're the advocate.
Well, I'm the advocate for their family. I'm representing mum or dad, but I don't want them to see me as the person who's looking to stick it to them. I want them to understand I'm here to help them. And so it's not unusual I'll give the kid, I say, look, here's my card. If you have a problem, call me.
Right.
Because I want them to understand I'm trying to help them. And typically after a week of being clean, they understand they need help.
Yeah.
Right. And we can talk about how we get there, but, I'm trying to help them. I mean, that's the bottom line. So.
Well, it's a good thing for them to know. I mean, obviously mom and dad know that, but it's great that you're able to get them to understand and buy in that, look, you know what? You're in court. If you're in court because of this, it's a serious problem. You don't want to come back here again.
Right.
You don't want to be here at all. You never want to be in the court system because it's just not fun. And it's broken, too.
Yeah, there's the good news about the work that we do is that it's confidential. So, obviously, if you get arrested...
Yes, explain that.
Yes.
I want the audience to hear that because of what you're dealing with and the confidentiality, because it's medical.
Right. So, look, if my criminal clients, complain to me that one of the things they complain about is they say, listen, my mugshot's all over the internet. Can you get it off? And you know what I tell them? No, I can't get it off. After a criminal case is closed, we can sometimes seal a record or even get it wiped off on expungement. But you can't get all the photographs off of the internet. So a criminal proceeding is, for the most part, it's there forever. With the Marchman Act is a confidential proceeding. And the statute makes it very clear that the filings, the pleadings that we file with the court that get us in front of a judge are a part of the person's confidential medical records, which means...
HIPAA. They're protected by HIPAA law.
They're protected by federal and state law, exactly. So that means that unless you are a party to the action, you're not going to be able to go and examine that court file. It also means that even when we go to court, you won't even be allowed to sit in the courtroom. I know as a young law student, when I was in Nova, I used to go down to court watch on a Friday afternoon. I used to love to sit and watch trials and all kinds of crazy stuff. You can't do that in Marchman Court. If you are not one of the lawyers or a litigant...
Or the family member, you can't.
The judge is going to be like, bailiff, they're not a part of this, they have to leave. It's confidential, and it's very...
I like that.
Yeah, it's
that should make folks feel very safe that in filing the proceedings, Baker acting and then Marchman acting, that your rights and your confidentiality and your privacy are going to be protected.
Right. I mean, nobody wants to apply for a job and then their prospective employer finds out they had a substance abuse problem.
Right.
If that question gets asked, it's that's between you and the employer. But I don't think we want people to feel comfortable coming
sharing. They need to share.
They
need to get real. They need to you need to be forthcoming with what the heck's going on.
It's a question I get asked a lot. And, when I first meet with a mom and dad, I say, look, even if you don't hire me, everything you tell me is confidential, right?
Right.
The whole point, even, with doctors, right? I mean, we want people to be honest with their doctor so the doctor can properly diagnose them.
Yes.
I want the family to be honest with me so I can properly advise them.
Right.
And, part of that advise them is them to understand that this isn't going to ruin their kid's future. It's actually going to do the opposite. It's going to save their future.
Save their future.
But
right.
the pleadings and the testimony, whatever evidence goes before the court, is confidential. And as a general, it's not going to be accessible to everybody else and their mother.
That's good. That's that should give people that confidence to just put it out there. So there's something else that you said that I thought was really important. And we talked about trauma. We talked about mental illness, addiction. And you said that you cannot medicate.
You can't medicate your way out of mental illness.
Or trauma.
Right.
You can't. You need help for it.
Right.
Like the vets need help with PTSD. If you've been sexually abused, if you've been physically abused, all of these different types of things create engrams in the brain that need to be diffused, and they need help. And they medicate because they feel so crappy.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know we talked about, one particular case where I had somebody, a child who had been sexually assaulted probably 15 years before things broke out. But I also deal with families who have adoptive children. They've adopted children.
Okay.
And it's an interesting perspective on things. And sometimes you get parents who have adopted two children. Mm-hmm. One is great, and the other child went sideways. And it seems, and it's not obviously it's not in every case, but I get a lot of those children that are adopted, and they're having terrible issues with, why did my biological parents not want me? They feel rejected.
Right.
And so
not loved.
They feel so those particular Marchman Act cases, or even if we're doing a guardianship, there's one or two treatment centers that I'm very comfortable with that specialize in dealing with trauma. In fact, one particular center I know that I send clients to, I think at any one time 20% of their population is adopted children, because it's really become it's become such a niche sort of trauma, as it were, that those particular individuals they need a different type of attention. And so, but again, parents don't typically volunteer the adopted children.
Yeah, no, they don't tell you. You've got to ask. You've got this whole. You probably have a whole list of things that you ask to make sure that you catch and cover everything.
Yeah, and perhaps that list expands as that we do more of these. But I will always ask, hey, has your child ever been prescribed medication for ADD or ADHD or anxiety or depression?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we talked about, because those medications can affect their brain, affect their chemistry, and then they want to, if they're not taking it or something occurs and they're no longer prescribed the medication, then they want to self-medicate. They want to smoke weed, they want to vape, they want to do this, they want to do that. They're looking for an easy way out.
Right. I mean, I think it's as high as 80 to 90% of the kids by Marchman Act have been prescribed some medication at some point early on in their life.
That's horrible.
To me, and I wrote
That's
an article
horrible. It's
about
almost,
this.
yeah, I would love to see that.
It's the slippery slope to addiction. It really is. And I'm not a doctor.
You're not knocking it.
I'm not
I know
saying
that.
you should never medicate your kids.
I'm
agreed.
just
telling you that on the kids that where the parents come to me because their children are out of control and are slowly dying, most of these kids have at some point been prescribed a medication. That's what I'm saying. And so if you've got a young child, 10, 12, just really be cognizant of that. Understand what you're doing, because it does seem to change their brain chemistry. And
you're seeing it.
Look, you have medical training.
Oh, my goodness, I can assure you.
That brain is still forming. It's got to do damage if it's used on a long-term basis. I can't imagine it doesn't.
And I always cautioned patients while I was on the bench. I would have them come to the consult window and say, look, I'm not sure that you really want to do this. And I would question them very carefully, question the kids without the parents there. Ask them things that other people wouldn't ask them, even their own doctor, to find out, something, do you really want to go here? And I didn't even know all the statistics that you're telling me about today. I had no idea. But I want to get into this point about what should parents look for. I want to know, tell the audience, Mark, what should a parent look for that might be an indication that, your kid's getting loaded, they're getting high, they're doing something they shouldn't be doing, and we don't know the point of origin, but give us some of those things.
So, normally, when I ask a parent, I'll say, how do you know your child's using? They'll say, well, I just know. I know my child, right? But invariably, there are things they notice, right? I mean, the child may suddenly be spending a lot of time alone in their bedroom, right? They're cutting themselves off from their friends. Perhaps they're cutting themselves off from their parents. Maybe they're not going to school like they should be, or maybe they're not going to work, right? Other things that get affected, their eating habits change. I hear some kids crave sugar when they start using opioids, right? So they gain a lot of weight. I've also had other children who stop eating and they lose a lot of weight. Okay. Their cleanliness, they stop showering. You get kids who are showering. Their hygiene is terrible. Wow. Is terrible. The parents might even find evidence in the child's bedroom or in their backpack. Pills, weed, little baggies with either pills or coke. There may be paraphernalia like scales, rolling papers, pipes. All these types of things. The child may even admit to the parent they're using. So, I mean...
And then they tell them, then the parent says, well, why are you doing this? And their obvious answer is...
it makes me feel better. Yeah. It makes me feel better. So, I mean, look, there are things there. And as a parent, the parent is probably the best positioned person to notice the change, right? And,
yes.
Parents, especially mums, have this sort of innate...
Oh, it's intuitive. You know when something is up with your kid.
Right.
You just simply... You get that feeling and you're like, oh my gosh. Oh, well, we're not going to get all this done, but just tell me quickly, because we only have about a minute. If they meet the Marchman Act criteria, then you can do two things. You can do an emergency ex parte, and you can file a second petition. And what those are really going to do, we'll just condense this down, is...
So we're going to file an emergency petition, right? We're going to get their kid picked up by the police. They'll be taken to a receiving facility and held for 5 to 7 days. That's petition number one. Then we'll file a second petition asking the court to send their child to treatment. So we'll have a hearing in front of a magistrate who's like a junior judge.
Right.
And we'll say, Judge, here's the evidence. Here's the assessment that was done. They need treatment. Please send their child to treatment.
Awesome.
And 70 to 80% of the time, the child will agree to go, which is a beautiful thing.
Cool. Mark, you got to come back because there's so much more here.
I'd love to.
Please. I would really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Folks, you can find Mark and his team at drugandalcoholattorneys.com and at 561-419-6095. 561-419-6095. Mark Astor, thank you so much for coming on. Folks, we are live on Facebook, Periscope, 95.3 FM, 1470 AM, and the iHeartRadio app, WWNN. This is Faith Washington. We'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faith.
My pleasure. Thank you. You've been listening and watching The Faith Washington Show, where we have widened your view of the world. Our guests share their business, family, and fun life hacks to make your world better. Hope you've learned something to apply to your life and business.